Transgender women have been barred from competing in all levels of women's cricket with immediate effect in England and Wales. The decision follows an announcement yesterday, Thursday, that transgender women will no longer be able to participate in women's football in England from June. Our correspondent Nesta McGregor joined me a little earlier to explain.
Well, in my hand, Mark, is that statement you referred to earlier from the England and Wales Cricket Board, more commonly known as the ECB. And simply put, it says, as of today, all transgender women are banned from playing women's and girls' cricket in the respective regions I just mentioned. Now, previously, the ban was only at the elite level, but today's rulings affects all tiers. Now, the ECB said that it's still considered the sport of cricket, one that is against abuse and discrimination. And the statement also pointed out that transgender players could still play open and mixed category cricket, where both genders are permitted to make up a team. So just to clarify again, England and Wales, the ECB with a blanket ban on transgender women competing in women and girls cricket.
And why now, Nesta?
Well, the ECB says updating its policy is a direct response to the recent Supreme Court ruling on gender. You might remember last month, judges came to the conclusion that a woman is defined by biological sex. So that's at birth. Now, it was a ruling that clearly not only affects sport, but we've seen a host of sport governing bodies updating their policies. You mentioned just yesterday, the Football Association also introduced a blanket ban on transgender women across the women's game. England Netball is changing its policy to an outright ban from September, while athletics, swimming and cycling already had bans in place.
Yeah, the impact of that decision continuing to be felt in so many different areas of life. I mean, what has been the reaction against this ruling by the Cricket Board?
Yeah, Mark, as you can imagine, those campaigning for transgender rights are disappointed with not just today's ECB ruling, but any sport which has since updated their policy. We've been speaking to Amelia Short, who is a transgender woman. She plays cricket in the northwest of England, and she's been explaining how the ECB's ban has impacted her.
There are people out there who do have a biological advantage when transitioning from male to female, but it's not necessarily the case all the time. And what I believe the ECB have done is they've not really given us as transgender women a chance to kind of say there isn't much advantage going on. We're not doing an injustice to the women's game. I'm unsure as to where I'm going to play my cricket. I still enjoy the competitive standard, but kind of like open category, which is formerly known as men's cricket, but obviously women can play in that, is not appealing to me. It's just not an environment that I feel fully safe in. I don't feel secure in there.
That's transgender cricketer Amelia Short. Meanwhile, Nesta, give us a sense of the other side, the supporters of this decision.
Yeah, well, at the heart of this debate is the topic fairness and inclusivity. There are those who believe that a transgender woman will always have an advantage, and that's due to factors like muscle structure, the size of limbs, height, etc. There's also the welfare and safeguarding argument, though. Some people have voiced concerns about the sharing of toilets and changing facilities, for example. So those campaigning, I guess, against the inclusion of transgender women in sport, certainly in sport that is for women and girls, will consider today somewhat of a victory.
That was Nesta McGregor. Well, on yesterday's edition of OS, I spoke to a transgender woman, Jessica, and her coach. Jessica plays football in the UK, and she told me how this decision will affect her.
I think it's diabolical, really. The FA have always said that football should be for everyone, regardless of their gender identity and their sexuality, and they've kind of backtracked on that and have, basically gone back on what they said. It's saying that I can never play football, with the girls that I've been training, 3 days a week with and formed friendships in a family, really, and I can't do something that I've done for so long and has been a big help with mental health. It makes me feel like I've been pushed aside and we're not important anymore. I can be whoever I wanted to be on that pitch. Playing football, I could feel like the Sam Kerr of the world and, feel like I'm just as much as a valued player as everyone else, really.
That was Jessica. Well, today's conversation hears from the other side of this debate as more and more sports announce bans on transgender participation in women's competitions. I spoke a little earlier to former Olympians Sharron Davies and Mara Yamauchi. Both are part of the Sex Matters group, which opposed the participation of transgender women in women's sports. Here's Sharron first.
I mean, we've had sports like triathlon and swimming and athletics that many years ago protected the female category because there's a biological difference between men and women. And in a sport like football, where there's actually contact involved, and we've seen people, get season-ending injuries playing against men on women's teams, I think it's been a real shame that it's taken this long for the FA to actually act.
When you say season-ending injuries, could you give us a couple of examples of that?
Broken legs. I mean, we've had teams where they've had a male on the team, and so other teams haven't wanted to play them. This has been presented to the FA many times. I've had an awful lot of parents on the phone to me about their children that are really distressed, that are thinking about giving up the sport, that have, also been injured, that feel that they haven't had a voice. A lot of the sports, one of the things that we did was to try to make sure that the sports polled their athletes. Because every time they polled their athletes, female and men, it always came back in the 90% plus that they wanted to actually ring fence and protect the women's category. And the FA has still not done that. They've still not consulted female athletes.
Like Sharron, I'm very pleased that they've finally come to the right decision, but it is really disappointing that they've taken this long. And furthermore, the FA said we would review this if the law or the science changed. Nothing has changed. The law has not changed. The Supreme Court judgment only clarified the law which has been in place since 2010, the Equality Act. And the science really hasn't changed. Male advantage has existed since the beginning of time. It's very clear in all sports, really. So for the FA to say, we needed the law and science to be updated to act is just nonsense. They could have done this way back in 2010. And I'm afraid it's because of pressure from trans activists and men's rights activists that it's taken them this long. And another notable thing that they've both said is, we feel for the trans women, we understand it will be distressing for you and we're here to support you. Have they ever said that about women and girls who've suffered unfair and unsafe sport all these years? I don't think they have.
Yeah.
So
it was one of the things, wasn't it, Mara, that we got quite upset about yesterday. We did a number of interviews and we were constantly being asked about the feelings of men in women's sport. And not once were we asked about the feelings of women in women's sport who were losing their opportunities and sustaining injuries. And this is what the whole problem has been about. It's just that women's sport has been totally and utterly disposable. Men would have never put up with this. They would not have put up with rules changing that meant somebody could identify into their sport and start taking away their opportunities and increasing their injury risk. They just would not have done it. But somehow women's sport was not important. And the FA have a horrendous history of not looking after women's football. Whether that's not allowing them to actually play on any of their pitches until 1971 or banning them after the war or all the different things that they've done. They've never really treated women's football with any great respect.
The female athletes really have been very sidelined in this. It's all been about the men and their feelings and their desires and demands to compete in the female category. It's really been a very shameful episode in women's sport, and I hope now that it really genuinely is over.
Can I just ask whether do you know any, or have you spoken to any trans athletes about the kind of psychological impact, or the psychological struggles that they have had, and also how sport has provided an outlet for them to be able to deal with mental health?
But you're doing exactly the same thing.
No,
Haven't we spoken to any male athletes to find out how they feel about being in women's sport? That's what you're doing.
No,
right?
sorry.
Please centre the female athletes in female sport. That's all we're asking you to do. Centre females in female sport. Women get less than 5% of the sponsorship dollar across the world in the world of sport. We represent more than half of this world, 51% here in the UK. All right, I did some research this morning, 40,000 football teams in this country that are playing. There's 92 in leagues for men. There is 12 in leagues for women. There is more than 10 times as many football teams for men than there are women. It is utterly disingenuous to say that any of these athletes have to give up their sport. What they have to do is go and play with other males, people of the same biological makeup as they have. And there are plenty of opportunities to do that without increasing the risk for females and without stealing their few opportunities.
Just to reply to that, Sharron, we yesterday spoke to a trans woman footballer, and I put to her the points that you are making as well. Can I simply ask you, just as I said to the trans athlete yesterday, what would you say to a woman footballer who says she needs and cherishes a woman's only space, and that also she would argue that there is a hormonal imbalance or a disadvantage in terms of strength when trans athletes play on the team? So I will put the same question to you. What would you say to a trans athlete who says that that is grossly overestimated, and that actually, when you look at the numbers of trans footballers, trans cricketers, it is so small? There are 30 trans footballers in the whole of England.
How many Lance Armstrongs was there?
So I'm just asking you, what would you...
It's irrelevant whether there is one or whether there is 30, all right? They are biologically male. And every peer-reviewed study that's ever been done shows that you cannot remove male advantage. Every single peer-reviewed piece of science that's ever been done. So please give me the evidence that shows that you can remove the advantage of being male. Give it to me now.
Can I respond?
Yeah, Mara. I mean, I would just ask also the same thing to you. And what would you say to, just in the same way as I put your point of view to the trans athlete, what would you say to a trans athlete who says that they cherish sport in this way? What would you say to the other side?
You started talking about a trans woman using she, her. I just want to make clear to your listeners that we're talking about a male athlete. Then later you said, what would I say to a woman? So in my mind, I'm confused whether you're talking about male or a male person or female person. So if you're talking about...
My question is, what would you say to a trans athlete?
Do you mean a trans-identifying male or a trans-identifying female athlete?
I'm saying a trans athlete who identifies as a female.
Well, so somebody who is male competing, who identifies as a woman, competes in women's sport. That's my understanding of what you're asking me. I would say to them, sport must be welcoming and fair and inclusive of everybody. And the way to do that is categories, not just by sex, but by age, by weight in some sports, and by type of disability in parasport. Therefore, if you are male, you must compete in the male category because women and girls, i.e. females, deserve fair and safe sport. I've seen numerous trans-identifying males who compete in the female category in my own sport, distance running, some of them against the rules, say, oh, but it's very important for my mental health. I think sport is fantastic for mental health. I've benefited myself enormously from it, but it must be fair and safe for everybody. Complaining about mental health as some kind of justification for a male to compete in the female category and destroy fair and safe sport for females, I'm afraid I simply do not accept. If I say to you, oh, I have terrible mental health, go and let me run in the under-10s race, that's okay, isn't it? Nobody would say it's okay. The only reason people think males in the female category is okay is because the people who suffer are women and girls. We would never allow adults in children's races. We won't allow able-bodied athletes in competitions for athletes with disabilities. This has to end. Males are very welcome in sport. I think sport should be for all. I totally support everyone competing and participating in sport at whatever level they want. But if you are male, you must stay out of the female category under all circumstances.
Would you both support a third category for trans athletes?
But how would you do a third category? I mean, I think there's a space for mixed teams, but then the FA have an age limit on where they would say it's not safe to have a mixed team. And there's the irony of their policy. So if they turn around and say to young people that, you have to stop playing mixed teams at 17 and 18, which is just recent because it used to be 16, because it's unsafe, how can they then say to adult females it's not unsafe to include a male in their team? I mean, it was a contradiction of their rules anyway. And what's also extremely frustrating is a lot of trans-identifying females, so trans men, but they're biologically female, they still opt to stay with the women. So they identify as men, they call themselves a man's name, they wear men's clothes, but unless they're taking testosterone, of course, which is illegal, they then compete with the women. And none of the women have a problem. We had several binary identifying athletes who were biologically female at the Olympic Games as well, all competing with women. And women have no issue. So the big crux of this really is that men need to be more welcoming on their teams of non-conforming males. And that's the crux. That's the problem. It's a male problem. It's not a female problem. So what we shouldn't be doing is making women suffer and lose their opportunities because men's sport is not welcoming of non-conforming men. That then becomes a men's problem, not a woman's problem.
Mara.
Can I respond to your question about third categories?
Yeah.
So I have no problem with prefer not to say. If people want to participate in sport, but they absolutely cannot bring themselves to declare their sex, I respect that. But if there's a prefer not to say category, it cannot have anything like prize money. It's for those people who really can't bring themselves to declare their sex, but the competition is in the male and female categories. I oppose a non-binary category because non-binary is totally irrelevant in sport. It's an identity. What is relevant in sport is male and female only sex,
Mara,
and also age. And
I just wonder. You talked about how the beauty of sport is that it is an inclusive thing, and I just wonder whether you would say that is inclusive if there is a category of sports people who would compete under different terms, that they would not win prize money, or that they would be
they can win prize money. You're putting words into our mouths, right? We're saying to you that if they don't want to declare, then that's fair enough. But if they want to compete, they have to declare the truth, the reality of the body that they actually have. You have to meet the same rules as everybody else. That's the whole point, that it's fair.
Former Olympians Sharron Davies and Mara Yamauchi. And just a reminder that yesterday, Thursday, we had a lengthy conversation with Jessica, a transgender female footballer, and her coach, Steve Fletcher. You can hear that full conversation online. Just search for BBC OS and listen to Thursday's edition of the programme.